Well, Jerry, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. Want to learn a lot more about you. The focus of our videos for Around the Horn is conversations with leaders who invest in others, and I know that's what you're doing. Let me read your bio, and then we'll jump into some questions. Jerry has dedicated his life to pastoral ministry since 1987, serving the San Antonio area as youth pastor, church planter, and senior pastor. His life was transformed in his 20s when he met Jesus Christ and was forged through a discipleship relationship early in his walk with the Lord. In 2019, Jerry embraced a new calling with Man in the Mirror, stepping away from the pastorate to pursue God's calling in a different capacity. Jerry is deeply passionate about ministry to men through the local church, focusing on helping churches build a discipleship pathway for every man in their church. Let's talk first about your faith journey. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in a Christian home. Honestly, my young adult life was I was kind of, well, my dad abandoned our family early in life. I say abandoned my family. He didn't have anything really much. He wasn't mean towards us or whatever. He just didn't. He left us and didn't really communicate with me or my family much. Birthdays, Christmas, and so that just kind of does something to a young man. And I just found myself, just really wanting to win his approval. But I wanted so much to hear him say, "I love you. I'm proud of you. I like what you're doing." I hungered after that, and because I couldn't get it from him, I started trying to get it from wherever I could. So I would be whatever I needed to be to just win someone's approval or what have you, and that just kind of shaped my life. I later found out some other things related to my dad, and I just kind of despised who he was. It seemed like he loved. And I love my dad today. He's dead, but I love my dad today. We restored our relationship when everything was over with. But it just seemed like at the time that he loved alcohol and other women more than he loved his family, and I just despised that. But ironically, I found myself becoming exactly who he was, and that's pretty typical, as you well know. So I just found myself becoming exactly who he was. So at 22. Or thereabouts. I'm married. I have my wife. We have a baby on the way. Our oldest son, Eric, she's pregnant with him, and I've got 2 alcohol-related arrests. I'm well on the road to ruining that marriage relationship. Just everything my dad had done is just beginning to take place in my life. And without spending a lot of time on the backstory of it, God just kind of, the way that he does, God just kind of put me in an isolated environment where this approval junkie was all by himself. And it was a long time ago. It was before talk radio or podcasts or anything. And music has never just really fired my jets, just having white noise on or whatever. So I'd be eating my lunch in my truck, because no one else wanted to be around me at that particular place. But I'm trying to find something to listen to on the radio, and the only thing I could find, the only talk radio really that was around in the late 80s was Christian radio, and so I just started listening to this guy. I later found out this guy was Chuck Swindoll, and I spent several weeks with him out there in my truck, and I just realized as we moved along who I was and who God was and what he had done for me in Jesus. And I would have been a cultural Christian, I guess. I would have said that I would have probably called myself a Christian, but the message that Chuck shared with me over those weeks of the Jesus that we know was incredibly foreign to me. And so I just remember giving my life to Christ as best I could, as best I understood it. And
did that take place in the pickup?
In my truck, yeah. As far as I can tell, a life change happened while I was inside that truck, to the point that I even went home and was sharing some stuff with my wife. She grew up in a Catholic home, but she wasn't really a Christian either. But so I had the joy of leading her to the Lord in our bedroom, and then our kids subsequent to that. But what's so significant is, this is why this is why I'm so passionate about this. What radically changed my life, Jesus changed my life, but what forged my life is I joined a little church because I was supposed to, right? That's what Chuck Swindoll told me to do. And a little church on the south side here in San Antonio called Kingsborough Ridge Baptist Church. Mm-hmm. And you know it well today, although it's changed a little bit. Mark Dance was the pastor there, a couple years younger than me, but that guy just believed in discipleship, and not like a 12-week course or something like that where you get a certificate at the end, but he just poured his life into me. And I studied him. I watched him do well with his wife. I watched him do not so well with his wife and have to repent. And, we just did life together, and a few other guys as well. And I just grew crazy fast in my faith. I know we studied God's word. I know we did some of that, but I was just studying Mark probably as much as I was doing anything else. And felt like God called me into ministry pretty quickly after that. And and so started pursuing education. I was a high school dropout. Started pursuing education, and one thing led to another. I was youth pastoring and several churches here in San Antonio, and wound up planting a church, and then merging that with an existing church, and then becoming pastor of another church, and just had an amazing ride, 35 years of, I would call it pastoral ministry, even though not all of it was senior pastoring. I was pastoring teenagers and their parents, and just it's just been amazing. I love the local church, and I have loved pastoring, and so that's just kind of my faith journey. And so with Man in the Mirror, we have this convictional statement. I think I've always believed this. I think you believe this. I just never had this concise, this distilled way of saying what I can believe deep down inside a conviction was. But the convictional statement is discipleship changes everything. Mm-hmm. And man, it did in my life. Mm-hmm. It radically transformed who I was.
The issue you brought up, I think, is an issue that Paul talks about in Ephesians. Wives, respect your husbands. Mm. And I've got a lot of females in my wife, and 3 girls and daughters-in-laws and all that. And from time to time, the question has come up, why do you watch 2 guys get in the cage and beat each other up? And my response is, it's what Paul said. Men want respect.
Yes, they do.
They want approval. They want respect. And that is ingrained in all of us. And that's what you're talking about, is that was a driving factor in your life.
Absolutely.
So much so that men will get in the cage and beat each other up for respect.
Yes, that's right.
And men will do a whole lot of things for respect.
That's right.
Obviously, looking at your life before Jesus and your life after, Christ made a huge difference.
Amazing.
And so tell us about getting involved in Man in the Mirror, and what led you to that, to be connected with that organization, and then what have been some of the things that have happened since then?
Sure. So I guess the best way to explain that is, okay, so discipleship radically changed my life. Discipleship changes everything. That's a Patrick Morley. He's the founder of our ministry, Man in the Mirror. Patrick Morley says that. Patrick Morley also says, another convictional statement, that evangelism without discipleship is cruel. And so I talked a little bit about my dad, and I know this is kind of disconnected from your question, but it's going to bring us right there and land us in that place. So my dad, I was talking with my mom before. She's been gone for a couple years now, but I was talking with her, and she has dementia, and at that time, and you know how that is. You can remember things that happened 45 years ago, but you can't remember what happened 4 or 5 minutes ago. Yeah. And so she was just playing this movie in her head. We were driving probably back from a doctor's appointment, and she just began to lament. I don't know. I don't necessarily know that she was really talking to me, but she just began to lament. And my dad's name was Jerry, and just, I don't know why I couldn't hang on to Jerry. I don't know why I wasn't enough for him. She just began to say these things, and I just began to think about who I was and what could have happened in my life if God hadn't got a hold of me and Jesus had not transformed my life, and Susan could be having this same conversation with one of my kids later in life. And so I just told her, man, Mom, you're amazing, and you would agree with me if you had ever met her. She's an amazing woman. It's not you. Dad just needed Jesus. And man, she stopped me cold. And she said, you were about 2 years old, and we were going to this a little church on the south side of San Antonio called Solid Rock Baptist Church. I still know where it's at. And she said that we were going there for a few weeks, and every Sunday they would give an invitation. Your dad, one Sunday, went forward and made a profession of faith. He was even baptized. She said I would find him some mornings on the living room floor praying and reading the Bible. And she said, so your dad's a Christian. And I don't know that I agree with her, but that experience just sent me kind of reeling. I never met that guy, and begin to probe what happened. And so as she begins to recount some things, she told me that, no one in that church, there was no Mark Dance. No one in that church discipled him. No one reached out to him. No one touched him. They just, you're baptized, check mark on the ledger or whatever, and good luck.
If you come every Sunday, sit in the pew, listen to the sermon, and give your tithe, you're good.
Yeah, that's right. But my dad wasn't good, and so my mom's words were, after a little while, he just lost interest, and because it didn't work, he never even looked back. He never went back to that, and so discipleship changes everything, but evangelism without discipleship is cruel, and I've just always had a passion. I was discipled. I'm a product of discipleship, and so that's just what I've always tried to do. That's just how, in my estimation, that's what ministry looks like. It's just making disciples. I maybe not have always been as good at making a culture of discipleship in the churches that I pastored, but I certainly was a disciple.
You're a product of discipleship.
Certainly so.
When we were missionaries, one of the things that we would tell people is the process is not complete with evangelism.
No.
And we would tell people every newborn baby needs a family to grow up in.
That's right.
And if there's not a family there, then we start a new family, which would be a church family. And that's why we would plant churches, is because we've got new babies.
Yes.
They need to grow up into a culture of the gospel, and they need to go through a maturity process.
Absolutely.
Spiritual formation. One of the things that in 2025 that we'll be focusing on is spiritual formation.
Amen.
And of God called leaders. And that's one of the reasons we're talking with you today.
I love it.
Spiritual formation of God called leaders, which is discipleship.
Absolutely.
So you started in 2019.
Yes.
What happened in 2020?
Yeah, well, accepted a position at Man in the Mirror, which focuses on discipleship. I accepted a position with them in October of 2019. I was pastoring a church here in town, the Northeast Side, and I went through some training, and I resigned my pastorate in March, I believe, February probably, and I resigned my position effective May. I gave them a good runway. I'm responsible to raise, the ministry budget locally, so they gave me some runway to begin focusing on that as well. And then of course COVID hit, and sent everybody reeling, and it just didn't make sense at that time. The leadership of the church and myself, it didn't make sense to leave the church in kind of a vacuum of leadership while we were a small church. We weren't online or any of those kinds of things, so we just had to scramble and get some things going. So my introductory couple of years were kind of dual purposed. I was pastoring at a local church, and then also trying to build relationships with pastors so that I could help them build a discipleship pathway in their church for men as well. And so continued to do that until like December of 22, and then went, I guess you could kind of say, went full time into the ministry that I'm part of now. At Man in the Mirror.
So you mentioned discipling men.
Mm-hmm.
What about women?
Yeah.
The question always comes up.
Yeah, for
what
sure.
about women?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, obviously, we're to disciple all nations, and I would include all genders and age groups, for that matter, in that role.
Let's clarify, since gender is
yeah, that's true. Both male and female.
Yes,
right. The
not the 56 or 70
yes,
that Facebook
right.
has.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. The two that Genesis has is the ones that we kind of would focus on. Yes. So, it's two that we would recognize, and then we tend to focus on men, and I do get asked that question a lot. Why do we focus on men? And I would say there's probably like a multi-pronged answer to that. The first is historically churches haven't been very successful in reaching and discipling men. A man is a hard thing it's a hard critter to reach and disciple. Women, not trying to be sexist or anything, but women are typically much more spiritually attuned. They're much more easily brought into that kind of a nurturing, discipling relationship. We tend to be, John Wayne-ish, isolated. I've got this, never let him see you sweat, never cry in public, and I certainly don't need any kind of spiritual development. I've got this.
If I grew up in a small church, if it weren't for the women who taught us children, it would have been hard knowing about Jesus. But it was the ladies of the church.
Yeah, and man, isn't that the case in every church that I've ever pastored, and probably you as well? Women are by the lion's share. They are the leaders, and God bless them. I'm not trying to make any kind of a theological statement there at all, but I just really believe that God has called men to be leaders, to lead out and to protect and to nurture and to care for the church and the family. And like I said, I'm not trying to make any kind of a theological statement, but men have shirked back on their roles for a lot of reasons. Some of it not maybe entirely the fault of the men. But so I think church has just kind of moved backwards a little bit on that. In fact, there is a poll, a bit of research that was done by a group called discipleship.org that says that in the United States, only about 5% of churches have a culture that could be considered a disciple making culture. And so we've just kind of moved back. I feel like the church, even as speaking as a pastor, not speaking as a critic of the church, but speaking as someone who loves the church, I feel like, we've kind of moved away from the difficult, hard work of making disciples, and we've more moved towards, I'm being confessional probably more than I'm being accusational, but we more move towards this kind of a consumer mindset to where, come and consume this religious product that we provide for you a couple times a week.
COVID didn't help with that.
No, it didn't. It did not at all.
It's like fuel on the fire.
Yes.
Where you could sit home and watch the latest, whatever a church put out, and an edited video, and you're good.
Fuel on the fire, or maybe a blanket on the fire.
Yeah.
It just, because you're right. That just, that caused some real problems. But then why men also is because, our men are in trouble in our culture. Our men are in deep trouble. Deaths of despair are up. The second leading cause of death, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, and in young men between the ages of 18 and like 34, the second leading cause of death is suicide.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And then probably the third, so men are in trouble, and probably the third dynamic that I would say, because men are in trouble, and this is historic. This is not just for today. This has always been the case to some degree. But because men are in trouble, they tend to cause trouble. So the story is told. You may have heard this before about this village that discovers babies floating down this river, and we've got to do something. And so all these ministries, if you will, are designed to go rescue the babies and get them out of the water. And finally, somebody says, "Hey, you know what? Why don't one of us go upstream and find out why we're having to do this? And if those babies represent some of the some of the struggles that we see from pornography and the access that it has to sex trafficking and just other things that we see going on that are problematic, mass shootings that are problematic in our culture. I think if we go upstream to find out what's actually causing the problem, it's undisciplined, or maybe we could even say undiscipled men. And I would say that the undisciplined man, human male, is probably the most dangerous critter on the planet. And so I really believe that, if we want to see a cultural change, if obviously there's been an election and you either love what happened or you don't love what happened. Regardless, though, in 4 years something else is going to happen. Obviously, cultural change isn't going to come from politics. It's going to come from discipleship. Changes everything. It's going to come because we have a revival of sorts. But I believe that's going to be in a discipleship kind of a relationship.
A lot of us recognize, not just us, but a lot of people recognize the war on men in our culture, and on manhood,
absolutely,
and the feminization of men, and the crossing of genders, and the whole effort to destroy what biblical manhood is.
Absolutely,
I'm sure that's a big part of what you do in discipleship. Here's what real men do. And looking at the disciples, they stand alone for what's right. They work hard. They take care of their family. They shepherd those that God's put in under their. There's a lot of things I'm sure that goes into to what you're doing. What are some of the challenges that you have found? What some of the biggest challenges that you see facing the church and how your ministry can help?
Sure. So what we kind of, what Man in the Mirror, we kind of have two fronts that we seek to help the local church with. One of them is a set of concepts and strategies that we've kind of proven over the years, called No Man Left Behind, where we kind of come in as a missionary consultant to the church, build a relationship with the pastor, and then connect with the men's leaders to help them build a culture. We do have some curriculum, but this is not about curriculum. This is about giving some strategies and tools to the church so that the church can effectively, I can move away, and the church can effectively have a culture where they know what to do. Leadership knows what to do in discipling men. And so some of the things where I've seen some of the biggest challenges is I don't know a pastor who doesn't want to disciple his congregation and especially to disciple men. All of us do. I think a lot of us have struggles in some of those areas, and some of the biggest struggles that I see is just kind of a disconnect from the men in our church with the ministries that we offer that we would maybe hope would produce disciples. And so we have, there's several elements of what we do, but I would just share a couple things with you. And so I was just at a larger church in New Braunfels, and we did a ministry audit with them. And so one of the things that we try to show the church is that, every congregation has, we say, 5 types of men. And really, so within the scope of that, I would say that there's like 4 stages of discipleship, and then there's a 5th element there. So those 5 types of men are like just the natural man. All he really focuses on is me. I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to make people happy, or just make myself happy, or whatever the case may be. Then we talk about cultural Christians who God's in the mix, but maybe more like a genie. And so I believe that there's a God. I believe that if I hold my mouth just right, or I live right, or I do this right, God's going to bless me. And if I'm not being blessed, then I must have done something wrong to make the big guy upstairs mad, or whatever. Cultural Christians. And then we have biblical Christians that there's still the me and God, but that's kind of been flipped. And so this guy is very interested in the way that it makes him feel when he serves God. He loves to serve God. He loves to study the Bible, but it's kind of, there's still an element of selfishness inside there. It's the way I feel. And then there's servant leaders, and some of the guys that you're talking about influencing others. And these are the men that just, their primary focus is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. The end game, the widget that we're trying to produce in discipleship, and then stretching across all of those stages, if you will, of discipleship, is the hurting man.
Yeah.
And so, maybe that's because of some kind of an addiction, or maybe it's a financial crisis or a relationship issue. But those stretch across every one of those. And so rather than use those as a way to judge a man on what's going on in his life, we try to encourage the church to use those as categories to recognize that we have these guys. And so these are opportunities for us to minister. How are we connecting with them? And so just to use this example without naming the church, this larger church that I was just with, I asked them to kind of give me some percentages. It's all going to be guesswork, but the leadership team has a pretty good idea of where you see, these 4 stages, especially from the natural man to the servant leader. Where do you see the percentages of men in your church? So they said, like 5% maybe were natural men. Maybe 1 to 2% were servant leaders, and like 80% they submitted were cultural Christians. And so we take a look. Okay, so what ministries are you currently engaged in to draw these men into discipleship? And so the majority of the ministries that they focused on were things that would be very interesting to men who are in the servant leadership or the cultural Christians. They were very Bible study based, and which those things are great. Yeah. But if 80% of your men are not going to be interested initially in a Bible study, they're never going to come to those things. And so, how do we reach them and draw them into those kind of we believe another Patrick Morley quote. We believe that a group of guys around the Bible serving a kingdom cause will solve 90% of a man's problems. We believe those things, and we want to draw them into that. So that Bible study is the goal. Life-on-life discipleship is the goal. But how do we reach these guys that are over here? So if I have no ministries to connect to these guys, then I'm never going to reach them. Conversely, though, there's churches that say, oh, yeah, we just have these retreats, or we throw an axe, or do these great things, fishing trip, car shows, and we had 300 guys at our event. And so we log big numbers, but we never really see any movement. And so what we try to do is give the church a way. And so you asked me what's one of the biggest challenges. It's just we tend to be very myopic in the way that we approach ministry to men. We're just going to do a Bible study. We're just going to do a car show. Well, we try to show them how you can take some of those ministries and use those to draw men into a deeper relationship, into a deeper discipleship relationship, which, as you mentioned earlier, the threshold of which is evangelism. And so
it sounds like what you're seeking to help churches do is to figure out what the end game is.
Absolutely.
And the end game being a discipled man who follows the Lord.
Yes.
And that's the end game. And what do we need to do to spearpoint or really focus our resources and our strategy? What methods do we use?
Yes.
What events? But everything funnels down to that focus.
Yeah. So we try to we try to draw them to a place of real intentionality. And you said the end game. So what is the widget that we're trying to produce? And so I won't get into a lot of it, but we spend quite a bit of time. This whole process of working with the church can take 3 to 5 years, and then I'm there for the church for, hopefully I can move away, but we try to help them have a vision for what their ministry to men should be. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean the vision of the church. The men's ministry should support the vision of the church, but if we're talking about a vision-driven ministry to men inside of a local church, what I really want the leadership team to think about is, what is the widget, and I'm using that term, but you know what I mean. What's the widget that we're trying to produce? What should a man look like if he's been through our ministry for 5 years? We use heart, head, and hands. What should he think about in relation to God, his family, the church, and what should he think about? What should he be passionate about? What should he be engaged in? And we help build a composite. And it's probably going to be pretty much the same with most churches, but this way, the leadership of the church, the leadership team, which are probably mostly lay people, the leadership team begin to have ownership, and they have built what they expect that to look like. And so now they have a target. And so if my event or if my Bible study is not moving men to become this, then I'm not doing something right. We call it the portal priority. This is what we're to be focused on.
Yeah, that's great. What strategies do you suggest for cultivating new leaders within a church ministry? So you're trying to funnel guys toward the end goal of being the discipled man. What strategies do you promote?
So you mentioned leadership, and leadership is incredibly important. And so we talk about, as a ministry, we would say there's 3 strands of leadership that are vital inside the ministry to men. The pastor, right? The enthusiastic support of the pastor. He is the leader of the church, and so his support, his enthusiasm, in some cases his involvement, but not necessarily. A man who thinks about and is passionate about ministry to men. Just one leader, and then surround him with a group of guys, a leadership team. And so how do you build that team? And so we'd take a church through just a leadership audit, begin to look at some things. But I think the best way to do that is just take your time and begin to build into that leadership team what you want the other men in your church to be to each other. So if we're drawing them into small group, let's spend a significant amount of time just discipling one another. So we tend to get in a hurry. I mean, isn't it true? We tend to overestimate what we could do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 5 years.
Yeah.
And so we tend to get in a hurry and just, we just have this leadership team, just a bunch of warm bodies, instead of just, hey, let's become together that cohesive band of brothers that we want to see our men become. Let's become that to each other. And now that we're in that place, maybe we've been meeting together for 6 months. Now we begin to become strategic about reaching the men in our church and seeing them discipled. We not only have a vision for what we want them to become, but we have become what we want them to become as well. So and anyway, I know but as and we just continue to do that. We just continue to draw men into those small groups, and that's where leadership is developed.
Yeah. Funding. Obviously you need to live and take care of yourself and your family. How does funding occur?
Yeah. So I have 2 things. I have an incredible group of ministry partners. I'm always looking for new people who would want to be part of that. That they pray for me. I send them communication on a regular basis where they can kind of know what's going on, but they help support the local ministry as well. They're invested in that ministry as well, and so I value and pray that God would continue to send people who are who see the catch the vision and see the importance of discipling men, of seeing men be changed, and will come on board and be a partner with us that way. Also, I have an amazing advisory team, 11 people, kind of like we're a national ministry, so we do have a national board with fiduciary responsibilities and things like that. But I have a local group of 11 people. We talked about a mutual friend of ours, Tim Tolosa. He's part of that team, and so they help cultivate finances and things like that, financial resources to help. I'll be honest with you, this is probably the most difficult part of any ministry, to be honest with you.
For most of us,
Yeah.
the financial part, raising funds and all that, is the most difficult.
It is. But what I have discovered, and I'm still discovering it, what I have discovered is that there is a certain amount of joy and faith that gets generated inside of us when we are trusting God to provide people who see the same vision that you do, maybe aren't going to go do what you're doing, but want to send their financial resources to do what you're doing. And I don't know, my sin, I guess, I confessed earlier that I've always been a kind of an approval junkie. Just knowing that I've got a team of people that are supporting me and that trust me financially, it's very encouraging. It's stressful, but it's the most encouraging thing that I've ever done. I do love it.
So, COVID really pushed churches to develop online giving.
Yeah,
that's pretty much become a default.
Yes, indeed.
You know, it's kind of the base. Everybody has online giving in some way. How could people find your online giving?
Yeah, sure. So maninthemirror.org, just that phrase, maninthemirror.org, not Michael Jackson or anything like that. maninthemirror.org /Jerry Canupp, or they could just go there and there's a link they can click on for area directors, and they can search and find my name, and they can contribute that way. They can get on and contribute that way. But maninthemirror.org is the hub where they can find that and a lot of other good resources as well.
Who keeps your books? Is it Man in the Mirror?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So
you have oversight of all the finances.
Incredible! Yeah. Incredible. We have an amazing team of people. Actually, we're headquartered out of Florida, and so.
So if anybody gives, they can trust that it's going to be looked over and the proper people are going to be involved.
Yes.
And they're giving to you, but they're giving to the organization that has oversight. And so there's a trust level there that, it's not some crackerjack organization, but
yes,
it's financially responsible.
And so those are resources that come to me, and they are set aside in an account with my name on them, but they are not necessarily my resources. In fact, there is such a level of accountability. I expenses that I have, or things that, whether it's my salary, or whether it's a trip that I'm taking to Houston to visit with a church, or gifts that books that I want to give to a pastor, or what. Everything has to be
accounted for.
That's right, and so it's a great organization.
And I would assume anybody that gives at the end of the year gets a letter to show what they've contributed.
Absolutely, everything is tax deductible, and
that's important for some people.
It is,
and so obviously we're coming toward the a time into the year.
Yes.
So finances would be helpful.
Yes.
And anything you would like to say to a church about ministry, or anyone about becoming a new supporter?
Yes. So I believe, I just got to speak from a place of passion, right? I believe that discipleship changes everything. I believe that it's not, we are a parachurch ministry, but I don't believe that it's the role of any organization to make disciples. I believe it's the role of the local church. So our target is men, yet our focus is the church, because the church is the disciple-making vehicle that God left on planet Earth. Maybe, speaking as a pastor, maybe we haven't historically done, in America at least, a good job at making disciples, but we believe that God's given us a trust, no man left behind, a proven set of concepts and strategies that we can help a church implement, and so I've been trained in that, and I believe in that. I'm passionate about that, and if you'd like to to help support that effort locally. I am an area director, but I'm also just recently I'm a regional director as well. So I have a group of some of the most amazing guys that are part of my team from here to California, just kind of following the state lines up around Utah and all that. 8 guys. We're always looking for more. So if there's, we're talking about funding, but if there's anyone listening that thinks, hey, this is something I would like to do, man, I would sure like to hear from you there as well. You can still contact me or any of our guys through that maninthemirror.org link. But then I would also just so I mentioned that's the one, still talking about funding, I suppose, but Man in the Mirror, No Man Left Behind is the one of the fronts that we have, and I'm excited about it. It helps churches. It works effectively where it's implemented. I've seen it. But the other thing that I'm really excited about is it's an ancient practice that we're kind of working with within the church to help produce. We're losing a generation of men. We're losing a generation, period. But we're losing a generation of men. The largest. We see some trends where maybe some of this is reversing, and praise God. But the largest growing religious segment in America is the religious unaffiliated, the nuns, as we call them. And, a lot of guys my age, I'm 61 years old, a lot of guys my age look at that younger generation and, we tend to make fun of them. We have names like Snowflake and other things like that we might use to address them, skinny jeans and man buns and, piercings in places I didn't know that I had places. And, we make fun of them, but the reality is we produced that generation. Yeah. And instead of making fun of them, my goodness, we should be going to get them. So we have a fairly new, as like I said, it's an ancient practice, but a fairly new initiative within Man in the Mirror called 10,000 Spiritual Fathers. And so within the scope of this, what we're trying to do, what we are effectively doing, what our hope is to equip men in the second half of their life, say 45 years old and older, to become missionaries to young men in the first half of their life. So we'll work with a group of men in a church or in several churches that just want to come together, help put them into small groups, and we'll spend 12 weeks with some older guys, pouring into them, helping them understand the culture. Just like if you were going to a foreign mission field, helping them understand the culture, what are their affinities, what offends them, how do you affirm them, and just understanding some of this culture that we're trying to reach, just some basic relationship dynamics, and then as a group we start praying about maybe a young man, maybe in my church, maybe in my home, maybe at HEB who's bagging my groceries, or I don't know, a young man that maybe I'd want to go and invite to have a cup of coffee and just, hey, tell me your story. Just begin to build a relationship. And we have tools that we would even put in the hands, journals that we'd put in the hands of these, what we would call, we wouldn't encourage them to call themselves that in that context, but what we would call spiritual fathers. So these journals, the spiritual father has one, the spiritual son has one, where there's some journaling that they can do, some answers that they can address, or questions they can address rather, and just gives them something to talk about when they are meeting together. We kind of loosely organize these around 4 quarters, so a full year that a spiritual father would be engaging with a spiritual son. Hopefully it goes beyond that. But so the first one is called Known, where I'm just basically getting to know a young man and letting a young man get to know me. We polled young men, 18 to 35-year-old men across the United States, and we found that while there's a lot of things that we can be concerned about, something very encouraging is almost to a man, because of a lack of real masculine influence in his life, most young men would be very, very open, very excited about having an older man help him navigate life. He may not be interested in a Bible study, at least not at first, but he's very interested in having an older man just help him figure out what marriage looks like, or how to change the oil on my car, or just some of these kinds of things. So Known is the first one, just building a relationship. The second journal set, the second quarter, is called Loved, where we just really understand what love is and how we can build that. And there's probably not a lot of Bible in either one of those, journal sets, but there's a lot of Bible in a spiritual father
Yeah.
who's mature in the church, and he can just be sharing some things, concepts that maybe a young man doesn't even know initially comes from the Bible. And then the third journal set finally is called Trinity, where if he hasn't already, he's going to be exposed to the God who both knows him and loves him. And then the final journal set is called Faith, where he'll begin to put some things in place so that discipleship, so that he can begin to grow and mature in his faith, hoping that, praying that at that point, by that point, maybe he has crossed that threshold of evangelism, of faith, and now he is a disciple. And finally, just the last part of that is how he can begin to turn around and do this same kind of discipleship in another young man's life. And so if those kinds of things sound interesting, I would love to have some people support.
What you're talking about is, I really believe the need that God has put in all men.
Amen.
Men want a father no matter
Amen.
what age they are.
Maybe
Even if they're in their 60s,
yeah.
they want father figures. They want brother figures. They want iron sharpens iron.
Yes.
They want that.
Yes.
And our culture has pushed aside some of that. But what you're talking about is hitting the real need deep within who guys are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not man in the mirror's phrase, but I just like to say it's rekindling the ancient art, the ancient practice of discipleship, and it starts with mentorship. It's really friendship. It's just masculine friendship. And
you know, they say in the ancient Greek army that the young men would go out to battle, but they would walk through the older men who would cheer them on.
Amen.
And that's exactly, like an older man may not be able to go out and do what a younger man does, but he can sit and have a cup of coffee and talk about life issues. And like, hey, I tried that. Let me tell you how that went.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And
any final thoughts that you might want to share?
I am just convinced that there is probably nothing that I've ever done. I mean, I left the pastorate to do this, and I love the local church. I loved pastoring. There's probably not anything that I think is more important right now than what we're engaged in. Especially, I love helping the local church, but the spiritual fathers just energizes me in a way that I can't fully explain. I really believe that if a revival is coming to our nation, I don't think that it will come on the heels of some explosive crusade or something like that. I think that it will come on the heels of a group of guys in pockets all across the United States, sharing their faith and growing deeper in their relationship with each other, living as a mature man of God and before his family, not lording anything over, but a mature man, and leading his family, leading his community in things of faith and back into the faith. And so I believe that this is I'll spend the rest of my life doing this.
Yeah.
I believe this is the greatest ministry I've been part of, and even with all my pastoring, how much I loved that, I can't imagine anything that is more has the ability to impact the world than reaching a man and deepening him in his faith through discipleship.
It has been said many, many times, you reach the man, you get the whole family.
Yeah, indeed.
You reach mom, you get the kids.
Indeed.
But you reach the man, you get the whole family.
Indeed.
Thank you for being a leader who invests in others.
Thank you for doing this.
And we'll talk again down the road.
I'm sure.
We'll catch up to hear some of the stories of what God's doing in your life.
I would love that.